Hi, good day everyone. I am Rinaldo Leon Liwanag, and today I will be discussing the article titled Wittgenstein and the Context of Rationality by Andreas Grimmel of University of Hamburg. So for this activity, I am instructed to prepare a scholarly review of the article Wittgenstein and the Context of Rationality by Andreas Grimmel. I'm instructed to read the article carefully and write a concise essay that summarizes, evaluates, and reflects on the main points and arguments of the author. So, for my essay, I titled it Rationality in Context or just Rationality. Let me start. Wittgenstein and the Context of Rationality by Grimmel 2015 buttress points on the prevailing narratives of Wittgenstein's illusion on rationality, instead how the term ascribed on his own transformative philosophy. As Grimmel 2015 argued, in between the former's philosophy lies context. Thus, on this essay, I will try to give brief narration of Wittgenstein's philosophy, entangled with Grimmel's argument towards rationality and context. But the boggling question, does the context coincide rationality or rationality in language, or it's just rationality itself, will echo at the end of this prompt. In the Tractatus, Wittgenstein's logical construction of a philosophical system found the limits and purposes of world, thought, and language. He then told, the book will draw a limit to thinking, or rather, not to thinking, but to the expressions of thoughts. The limit can only be drawn in language, and what lies on the other side of the limit will be simply nonsense. Wittgenstein explicated his philosophy of language, manifested in his differentiation of facts of nature, forms of life, language, language games, and rules. Grimmel explicated facts of nature as Wittgenstein's illusion on the understanding of the basis of human language, but focused on how these are generated within social boundaries. On the one hand, forms of life circles on the language that is shaped and changed by its culture and worldview, quote unquote, the intertwining of culture, worldview, and language. Though the meaning of language is dependent on its practical use, it also is inevitable to change and transformation as time goes by. Consequently, language games and rules, meaning, and meaningful action is relative. Hence, there is no right or wrong definitions, but only those that fit or do not fit in a language game. Language and action are linked and are interdependent. Hence, it is the openness and variability that characterizes language game. Wittgenstein tried to differentiate facts of nature and forms of life in his famous citation, if a lion could talk, we could not understand him. The point of this statement is that all living things, including animals, may develop their own language system. However, a lion, representing all animals in this case, will never possess the same linguistic expressions comparable to the complexity of human speech. I'm talking of linguistic expressions as the words, the nonverbal and verbal language that human use. Further, Grimmel 2015 conceptualized forms of life in riverbed. River as a language and all the sediments contributed to the growth, proliferation, and transformation of the multifarious language. Meanwhile, Wittgenstein's use of rule refers to all normative constraints which apply over an indefinite variety of cases to practices where our actions might be said to be guided, to situations where characterizing actions as correct or incorrect makes sense. It's according to Bix 1992. Hence, language game is an environment that provides rules on how linguistic expressions and their usage are linked to form meaning and meaningful action. In Latin, ratio in rationality means following interpreted as human intellect. or cognitive talent for computation, reckoning, reasoning, and judgment based on measures of utility, appropriateness, or efficiency. That's according to Grimmel. Put simply, quote unquote, by Blackburn, to accept something as rational is to accept it as making sense, as appropriate or required or in accordance with some acknowledged goal, such as aiming at truth or aiming at the good. In rational choice theory, actions and reasoning that are purposeful, interest driven, and benefit maximizing should be based on certain information they form the beliefs on which they can base a decision. Hence, according to Grimmel 2015, a belief may be rational and yet false. He argued that an action based on reasons is one of the central problems of rational theory, which is assumed to be a universal, timeless, and self referential dimension, which connects rational actor, way of thinking, and rational action, way of doing. Here, Grimmel 2015 argued that only in between forms of life and language that rationality can be understood. He proposed the term context, or language of a context, resulting in a comprehensive and a close systematic arrangement which makes possible the meaningful assignment of language and practice. It gives an accepted framework, a space of possibility, and specific reasons that makes action conceivable and possible. The reason why Wittgenstein opted not to use the term is because of its timelessness and universality, as the latter is very skeptical on fixed, linear, and deterministic notion of rationality. Instead, he transformed it using the terms acts of nature, forms of life, language games, and roots. Thus, Wittgenstein aims to open the block box and transform rationality to a localized, temporal, and variable concept which can only be understood by language. Grimmel then concluded that rational action means not only calculating costs and benefits aiming towards specific goal, but also a normative justification of statements or actions as reasonable and acceptable. It paved for continual development and adaptation of thinking about cognition and action. In the viewpoint of Wittgenstein's philosophy of language, rationality should be felt and determined using language and action. Hence, it can be argued that rationality is determinate of one's own eloquence, of his or her own language, affected by environment. For example, behavior, family, and educational background, social status, etc. And the predetermined action based on rules of the ever changing and dynamic society. Example is language evolve and some becomes obsolete over time. It could also be argued that if one's linguistic ability is not holistically honed by his or her environment, then he or she is invincible to unclear reasoning and baseless action, which may lead to further consequences, irrationality, or making the wrong decisions. Moreover, to Wittgenstein, to understand a sentence means to understand a language. To understand a language means to be master of a technique. Hence, to have a clear view of the situation, an individual must be intellectual to his or her own language, as Carnot defines analytic statements as logically determined statements, where truth depends on logical rules of inference and is independent of experience. This prevailing situation answers the notion of Frege's argument that all meaningful sentences have sense, but some lack reference. Hence, if we abide to Wittgenstein's argument that action should be based on language, Frege's notion lack of reference of meaningful sentence is debunked on the mastery of language of Wittgenstein's and further explicated on Carnot's view that logical rules, rationality which I suppose to be logical, is dependent of experience. Her, I termed it as linguistic mastery. Overall, if Grimmel 2015 argues that freedom of action, quote unquote, freedom of action and self determination become possible due to rationality and not in spite of it, and Wittgenstein subtly claims that only in language, actions, or reality can be understood. Thus, I argue that rationality exists in between freedom, language, and action or reality. Put simply, rationality is just rationality in the sense that it is already embedded in the freedom of an individual to decide what not to do and what to do. It is entrenched in language, whether someone is cognizant of it or not. Hence, everyone could be rational regardless of status, gender, and background. It is always evident to every action or reality as the outcome, whether it's good or bad. It is defined by an individual's rational decision. Thus, rationality needs no context, needs no form, needs no forms of life, facts of nature, or language games. It only needs itself to exist and a vessel, an individual, human, a living person to carry it. Thank you everyone for listening, and I hope you enjoyed my essay. Again, it is titled Rationality in Context or just Rationality. Have a good day, everyone, and God bless. Please subscribe and see you on my next bit. Bye.